3 years ago to the day was the launch of OpenAI's ChatGPT. To some, it looked like the U.S. had just won the next tech race before it even started. But now, the landscape is arguably completely different. Our technology editor, Peter O'Brien, then, is here to talk about it. Peter, hello. So,
hi, Erin.
What's changed then in these past 3 years?
The tectonic plates of this monumental technology are shifting. OpenAI is losing dominance. It's pledged to spend $1.4 trillion in infrastructure, but that's way more than it actually earns. Meanwhile, Google, who many people had written off about a year ago, is catching up. Users now spend on average more time on Gemini than they do on ChatGPT per session. And let's not forget that DeepSeek moment earlier this year, which opened the door to a whole lot of Chinese competition. And we saw just in the last few days Alibaba's new Qwen model, with some quite impressive results when it comes to processing video. It can now do hours of it at once. So make no mistake, the landscape is completely different. China is a big, much bigger player now than it ever was before.
How can China then be so competitive as it is that you described there, despite U.S. sanctions?
Yeah, that's right. So it can't access those top-of-the-line NVIDIA chips because of U.S. sanctions. But the reason the way it's kind of got around this problem is by going all in on an open source approach. So Beijing is encouraging companies to release all of their models for free. Anyone can pick them up, modify them, change them, and they build on each other in that way. Whereas in the US, the models tend to be proprietary. You tend to have a subscription to access them. And it has to be said for the US, for China rather, this approach is paying off. Funnily enough, in France, this open source approach was the one initially pushed, as I reported on in Open Sourcery, which was a report we did in March last year. Now, Mistral was the great hope for this, and Emmanuel Macron, the president, was pushing this open source agenda, and Mistral was raising billions of euros in funding through this same open source approach. But why hasn't it worked the same way as it's worked in China? Well, scale. China has a massive domestic market. They have multiple companies backed by the state, competing at the same time in this market, whereas Mistral is really Europe's only hope. It's its one champion, and it's trying to compete in a very fragmented market where people are also using US models. So we had the right idea, but we just simply didn't find a way to scale it up.
So Europe, in the meantime, Peter, appears to be leading on regulation.
Well, we were. The EU's AI Act was meant to be the kind of era-defining piece of regulation on artificial intelligence. But just in the last week or so, the EU has hit pause on this, worrying about stifling innovation and creativity. So the old bun fight in Europe is playing out again: regulation to protect people or deregulation in order to innovate.
Now, this is kind of a similar theme in other sectors, the EU being caught in the middle while the US and China race ahead as leaders.
Well, let's be very clear. Everyone is regulating. They're just regulating in different ways. So China are very focused on content control. They're very focused on national security. Individual US states are certainly regulating, but they're more focused on individual privacy, discrimination, transparency. And maybe Europe just kind of tried to do it all at the same time, and then realized that that's kind of stifling competition. So maybe we've had 3 years, maybe the next 3 years, we're going to see not which company is going to win, but which approach wins. China's open approach, the US's closed approach, or if everyone's to be very surprised, a third approach from Europe, which so far doesn't look very likely.
So, Peter, that's the geopolitics of regulation, but is artificial intelligence, or perhaps more specifically large language models, actually living up to a lot of the hype that we've seen over the years?
Well, my experience is that, and you may completely disagree, Erin, is that it's amazing at working with data that you give it. So say you've got a news piece and it's fully reported, it's got all the facts in there, and you give it to an AI chatbot, it will do a decent job at editing it. If you tell it to come up with a news report itself, it will pull some absolute rubbish out. It will have cliches, it will have false facts, and that's because it's trained on existing data. That said, it's very good at pattern recognition. That's why it makes a good editor. That's also why it's revolutionizing medical research, for instance. But let's be clear, the stuff about it replacing all of our jobs, being our last ever invention, things about it enslaving all of humanity, they're looking a little bit far-fetched at this moment.
So would you go so far as to say that we're perhaps in the early stages of an AI bubble bursting?
I don't think it's too much to say that there is consensus that we're in a bubble. The question is, what kind of bubble? Are we in a bubble where we're going to realize overnight that all the value is completely made up and we're going to return to the status quo and everything's going to collapse? I think most people think no. Are we in the kind of bubble where, yes, it's adding value, yes, people are using it, but the valuations are huge and we're overdue a correction? That's what I think most people believe at this point.
So what do you think are some of the downsides then that we didn't see coming with a little bit more hindsight now?
Italian brain rot? Nobody saw that one coming. But actually, that's part of a more serious point, which is AI slop and how it's taking over the internet and how people are very concerned about what things are going to be true and what things are completely generated by AI on the internet. That's a real concern. Another one is how AI is helping cyber criminals. So I did a report a couple of weeks ago following small businesses in France who are hit with fake Google reviews that are very convincing because they're written by AI. That's a concern. There are weirder ones as well, like AI sycophancy. Why are these chatbots trying to flatter us so much? Why are they so insistent on telling us we're amazing? Well, obviously the companies want them to do that because then we're more likely to keep using them if they're really nice to us. But what's that going to do to our psychology? What's that going to do to vulnerable people with, potentially AI psychosis? So 3 years ago, we've got a whole set of problems that we never even anticipated.
Very interesting to see how those continue to develop then.